The engine sputtered, then died in the icy grip of a Wyoming night, silence flooding in like dark water over a sinking ship. Out here, stranded on this forgotten stretch of road, every breath hangs heavy, each heartbeat echoes with dread. You trust your life to an ambulance, a lifeline against the wilderness. But tonight, trust is a brittle thing, shattered by something sinister lurking beneath the hood. Some men fix what is broken, others break things, watching them crumble for profit or power. Out here, sabotage isn't just a word. It's a death sentence whispered in metal and wire. And when those who swore to help become those who harm, the line between hero and villain blurs. In moments like these, when lives tremble on the brink, choices become weapons. This is a story about those choices that will ignite a war hidden beneath snow and shadow. And once sparked, this fire won't stop until every secret burns bright. Frost clung to the windshield of the old pickup as Jack Merritt, 48 years old and feeling every bit of it, cut the engine outside Cal's auto service. The winter wind sweeping through the sleepy streets of Findlay, Wyoming, was fierce, slapping at Jack's cheeks as he stepped onto the ice-slick pavement. The sign above the garage bore the new owner's name in bold letters, Cal Barnes, a man who had grand visions of turning the once homey repair shop into a chain of state-of-the-art service centers. Jack couldn't help but remember the days when this place was called Merritt's Garage, back when his father ran it with a handshake and a smile. But times had changed. His father had passed away. The mortgage had piled up, and eventually Jack had been forced to sell. Now he worked as a mere mechanic in the shop he used to think of as his own. Pushing open the heavy glass door, Jack spotted Logan, his 13-year-old son, perched on a battered waiting chair near a half-dead potted plant. Logan had that wide-eyed, curious gaze that reminded Jack so much of his late wife, Carrie. She'd been gone 3 years, and not a day passed without Jack wishing she could see the man Logan was becoming. But with only Jack left to guide him, father and son struggled to find their footing. As soon as Logan saw him, he waved a few pages of homework in the air math problems that Jack, given his mechanical mind, usually helped him with. "I've got just a few minutes, kid," Jack said softly, glancing at the clock on the dingy wall. "Cal wants me under the hood of Ms. Portman's Honda by 8 sharp." Logan's bright face fell slightly, but he understood. Ever since Carrie's medical bills had drained the family's savings, Jack had worked overtime to make ends meet. He tried to keep the fridge stocked, the rent paid, and a sliver of normalcy in Logan's life. But it was never enough. They had a one-bedroom apartment a few blocks away. Jack slept on the pull-out couch. Most nights, he'd drift off thinking of how he could have done better by Carrie, how he might have afforded experimental treatments if only he hadn't been so stubborn or proud. Now, all he could do was keep the boy afloat. Before Jack could even sit, Cal Barnes strode into the waiting area with that self-assured grin of his. A tall man in his mid-50s, Cal had thinning blonde hair slicked back, a neat goatee, and a personality that radiated company profits first. His voice was all business when he said, "Jack, I need you in Bay 2. We've got a backlog." He didn't even glance at Logan, as though the kid were invisible. That casual disregard annoyed Jack, but he'd learned to keep his mouth shut. Times were tough. A steady paycheck was gold. Giving Logan a quick pat on the shoulder, Jack headed into the garage, ignoring the faint pang of regret that rose whenever he let work overshadow his time with his son. The clamor of air tools and the smell of motor oil greeted him. Jack's station wasn't anything fancy, just a bench scattered with battered wrenches and sockets, many of which had once belonged to his father. He still etched merit on every new piece of equipment he bought, a quiet reminder of his roots. As he pulled on his worn-out coveralls, he wondered how long he could keep living this half-life, a man with a proud heritage, working under someone who saw him as expendable. He had no idea that an entirely different future lurked just outside the shop's doors, waiting to come roaring into his life at the most unexpected moment. Just as Jack finished tightening the last lug on Miss Portman's Honda, he noticed a frantic rapping at the garage's glass door. Through the streaked window, he saw a man in a paramedic's uniform, Tommy Reyes, a longtime friend from Jack's days in the Marines. Tommy looked frazzled, pointing out toward the intersection. Jack set his tools down and rushed outside without hesitation, ignoring the withering look Cal shot him from across the bay. Outside, the Wyoming wind was harsher than ever, swirling snow across the asphalt. Parked near the traffic light was an ambulance, hazard lights flickering but no siren, with its hood popped open. Tommy's partner, a younger paramedic, was rummaging under the hood in dismay. Traffic was starting to stack up, car horns blaring. Jack could hear a muffled voice crackling through the radio, presumably from dispatch urging them to move. Snow stung his exposed cheeks as he and Tommy hurried to the front of the ambulance. "What's going on?" Jack shouted over the wind. "Battery's dead, or the alternator's fried," Tommy said, his breath misting. "We've got a critical patient in the back, some older lady, collapsed at home. We're losing time, without missing a beat." Jack dove into the engine compartment, ignoring his lack of gloves as he fumbled with cables and tried to see if anything obvious was disconnected. He and Tommy had served together years ago, Jack as a field mechanic, Tommy as a combat medic, and they trusted each other implicitly. That old camaraderie kicked in. Within seconds, Jack realized the alternator belt had snapped, and the battery was practically drained. He cursed under his breath. The ambulance wouldn't last more than a minute or two on the meager remaining juice. If the engine died entirely, the heating and the life support equipment in the back would shut off. They needed a fix. Fast. Jack dashed back into the shop to grab a spare belt, half aware of Cal shouting, "Jack, where the hell are you going?" He ignored him, rummaging through the stock shelf for the right belt. Throwing the belt over his shoulder, he sprinted back outside, cold air slapping him in the face. A handful of onlookers had already gathered, some filming on their phones. A sense of urgency spiked through Jack's veins. Someone's life hung in the balance. The old Jack Merritt, the Marine who specialized in field repairs under enemy fire, took over. He replaced the belt in record time, hooking it up to the ambulance's pulley system. Then he signaled to Tommy's partner to try the engine. The ambulance coughed, sputtered, and then roared back to life in a plume of white exhaust. A ragged cheer rose from the small crowd. Jack barely had time to wipe his forehead before Tommy grabbed him in a quick hug and said, "Thanks, brother. You saved her." Jack watched as the ambulance pulled away, sirens now screaming, its wheels kicking slush into the air. He stayed out in the cold a moment longer, feeling the adrenaline subside. Only then did he notice Cal standing in the shop's entrance, arms folded, looking equal parts furious and calculating. Jack took a deep breath and headed inside. He already knew what was coming, but there'd been no other choice in his mind. If somebody's life was at stake, you acted. That was the code he'd lived by since the service, the one his father had drilled into him even before that. "Always do the right thing," his father would say. "The rest is just noise." Jack forced himself to meet Cal's glare. He braced for the fallout, silently praying it wouldn't cost him and Logan more than they could afford to lose. The moment Jack stepped back into the garage, Cal Barnes stormed over, his voice a hiss. "What the hell was that, Merritt? You think you can just run off whenever you feel like playing hero? We've got clients waiting, a schedule to keep." Jack swallowed, staring at the ground. "It was an emergency," he muttered. "They had a critical patient." Cal didn't let up. "You left a car on the lift, abandoned the work bay, and used shop inventory without clearing it with me." He jabbed a finger at Jack's chest. "That belt, that's the shop's property. You can't just hand it out like candy." Jack's cheeks burned, anger simmering beneath the surface. Part of him wanted to retort that he'd be happy to pay for the damn belt out of his own wages if it meant saving a life. But he also recognized that Cal was the boss. Jack glanced over to the small waiting area, where Logan peeked from behind a half-tinted window, clearly worried. Finally, Jack said, "I'll replace the belt. I'll stay late to finish the Honda. Whatever it takes. But I'm not sorry." Cal's face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, you'll do more than that." He grabbed a clipboard from the desk, flipping pages like he couldn't wait to find the right form. "We're going to have a little talk about your future here. Just then, Mrs. Portman, the Honda's owner, entered, glancing around nervously. "Jack, is everything okay with my car?" she asked in a timid voice. Jack forced a polite smile. "I'll have it done soon, Ms. Portman. I apologize for the delay," but Cal cut in. "We're handling a procedural matter. Have a seat, Ms. Portman. He'll be right with you." The tension in Cal's voice made Ms. Portman shuffle uncertainly, but she sat down, fidgeting with her coat sleeves. The rest of the afternoon felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Jack finished Ms. Portman's Honda, carefully ignoring Cal's razor-edge glares. Every screech of an air wrench and clang of a dropped tool jarred his already taut nerves. He fumbled with lug nuts at one point, nearly letting a tire roll free, earning a bark of disapproval from a coworker. By the time he shut off his station lights, sweat soaked the back of his shirt. Logan was still in the waiting area, doodling on a notepad with a worn-down pencil. Jack tried to compose himself before approaching his son, but the look on Logan's face said it all. The kid knew something was wrong. They walked out together, the sun setting behind the row of shops. Logan cleared his throat. "Dad, I heard Cal yelling at you. Are we okay?" Jack mustered the best reassuring tone he could manage. "Yeah, bud, we'll be fine. Let's just get home and think it through." But inside, a knot of dread coiled. He'd grown used to life's small humiliations, tight budgets, secondhand clothes for Logan, skipping a meal so Logan could eat better. Yet losing his job would be catastrophic. As he turned the key in the ignition of their rusted pickup, Jack vowed to talk sense into Cal, or at least hold on until he figured out a backup plan. Because if he couldn't provide for Logan, then every promise he'd ever made to Carrie, to himself, would feel like a lie. They arrived at their cramped apartment building, a drab complex built in the 1970s with stained carpeting and flickering hallway lights. Jack let Logan step in first, scanning the foyer for any sign of trouble. It was just a habit, remnants of his Marine days. Inside their unit, the living room and kitchen were essentially one small space, separated by a half wall. Logan shrugged off his backpack and went straight to the two-person dining table, rummaging for a snack that didn't exist. The cupboards were sparse, a few cans of soup, some crackers, and powdered milk. Jack tossed his jacket over a chair and sank onto the couch. A swirl of regrets and fears pressed at his temples. Rent was due next week, and they barely had enough saved. The old coffee can that served as their emergency fund sat on a side table, containing maybe a handful of dollars in spare change and a couple of crumpled bills. "I'll fix this," Jack whispered to himself. Logan, overhearing, managed a forced smile. "I know. Dad, you always do." Normally, Jack would spend the evening helping Logan with homework or telling him about funny mechanical slip-ups from his Father's Day. But tonight, his mind churned with possible ways to reason with Cal. Maybe he could pick up an extra shift. Maybe he'd apologize more thoroughly. Maybe he'd promise never to step out of line again. A wave of self-loathing hit him. Had it come to that, begging for the mercy of a man who cared nothing for the community? For the people the garage once served, he flipped on the TV, hoping for background noise, landing on a local channel. A news segment featured a white ambulance, the camera panning over the engine. The headline read, "Local mechanic saves ambulance patient's condition. Critical." Jack sat up, heart pounding. Was that the same ambulance the reporter interviewed a paramedic, Tommy Reyes, who briefly mentioned a good Samaritan mechanic named Jack? They cut away to the hospital's exterior, and the anchor summarized that the patient, an elderly woman named Clara Reynolds, was in critical care. Jack exhaled slowly. At least the ambulance made it. Turning off the TV, Jack rolled the tension from his shoulders. It struck him that he hadn't even known the patient's name when he made the decision to help. That was how life worked. Sometimes you just acted on instinct. Logan was busy reading a battered library book about astronomy, so Jack stepped into the tiny bedroom they shared. The single bed where Logan slept was neatly made. A collage of photos on the wall showed Carrie, Logan, and Jack from happier times, afternoons in the backyard, birthdays, a trip to Yellowstone. His father had taken that last photo before the cancer diagnosis. Jack allowed himself a moment to stare at Carrie's face, remembering her easy laughter and the tough resilience that kept him steady. He patted Logan's bed before quietly leaving the room, shutting the door so the boy could have some peace. Then he returned to the living area and eyed the empty cupboards. He needed to plan. If he had to, he'd pick up a second job, maybe delivering gas or plowing snow at night. He'd find a way. But deep down, he suspected Cal wasn't the sort of man who'd let a perceived slight go. The feeling that tomorrow would bring a storm was impossible to shake. And that storm, he feared, might knock them both right off their precarious footing. Morning broke with a pale winter sun barely cutting through gray clouds. Jack's alarm rang at 5 a.m. As usual, he needed the early start to handle the backlog at the garage, but dread weighed on him like a lead blanket. He was certain Cal had a confrontation planned. Over coffee, thin and lukewarm. Since they were almost out of grounds, Jack told Logan to head straight to the library after school. "I'm not sure if I'll be working late or something else," he admitted. Logan nodded. "Okay, Dad. I might join the after-school band practice." His voice was hesitant, because the school had hinted at extra fees if Logan wanted to keep playing the trumpet. Fees Jack couldn't pay right now. "We'll figure it out," Jack said, though he had no idea how. The child needed an outlet, and music had always been Carrie's passion. Denying him that felt cruel. They headed out, the crunch of snow and salt under their boots. Jack dropped Logan at the middle school, the boy waving goodbye with a reassuring grin he must have inherited from Carrie. Then Jack drove on to Cal's auto service. The sign glowed with neon starkness in the dim morning light, mocking him. Inside the garage, the overhead fluorescent lights buzzed. Several co-workers milled around, sipping coffee from styrofoam cups, exchanging uneasy glances. Jack sensed that some of them knew what was coming. No sooner had Jack hung up his jacket than Cal appeared, a thin manila envelope tucked under his arm. He motioned for Jack to follow him to a small office in the back. The space was cramped, lined with file cabinets that still bore the Merritt name from decades past. Cal perched on the edge of the desk, arms folded. The envelope in his hand bore some corporate letterhead, an official notice of some sort. "You put us in a precarious situation," Cal began, his voice measured. "Running off to fix an ambulance might look heroic, but what if they blame us for any failures, liability nightmares, incomplete tasks, and theft of inventory? You used a belt that wasn't paid for by the patient. That's a violation of store policy." Jack's stomach sank. He tried to remain calm. "I'll pay for the belt. I'll compensate for any inconvenience." Cal raised a hand to silence him. "We run a modern operation here. Jack, we have rules, procedures. He tapped the envelope. "You're consistently behind the times. No computer-based diagnostics, no willingness to adapt to the new system. And now, you decide you can step away from your duties on a whim." He slid the envelope across the desk. "I've discussed this with corporate. We've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately." Time seemed to slow. Jack's eyes locked on the typed letters. Termination of employment. He tried to speak, but only a croak came out. He'd known, on some level, that this was going to happen, but seeing it official made the floor feel like it was tilting beneath him. "Cal," he managed. "I've worked here my whole life. My father built this place's reputation. You can't just—" Cal stood up, not a shred of remorse on his face. "We'll mail your final paycheck. Return any shop property. Now, I need you off the premises. If you have any questions, call HR." Jack wanted to protest, but his throat felt dry. He'd fought battles in the desert, survived on nothing but willpower. Yet this moment felt more devastating than any firefight. He thought of Logan, how he'd tell him, what this meant for their future. But there was no time for more words. Cal pressed him out the door, the final squeak of that battered hinge sounding eerily like a coffin lid shutting. Jack found himself standing in the parking lot, a pink slip in one hand, and humiliation clinging to him like a second skin. A few of his co-workers peered from windows, some with sympathy, others with mild curiosity. He forced himself to keep his chin up, loaded his tool chest into the back of his old pickup, and turned the ignition. His father's old St. Christopher medal dangled from the rearview mirror, swaying as the engine coughed to life. He drove aimlessly for a while, the roads taking him past shuttered stores and winter bare trees. Where would he go now? The local hardware store didn't need extra hands he'd checked a few months back. The diner across town might have a dishwasher job, but that couldn't cover rent, and any dream of a second chance as a mechanic would require references he no longer had. The bitter truth sank in Cal effectively blacklisted him in this small community. If the rumor spread that he'd been fired for stealing inventory, nobody would hire him to fix a lawnmower, let alone a car. He stopped eventually at the parking lot of Finley Memorial Hospital, the very hospital where that ambulance had delivered the critical patient. A large sign out front read, "Donations save lives." Jack had no reason to be here except the faint tug of curiosity about the woman he'd helped. Clara Reynolds. That was her name. He lingered in the truck, half wishing he could walk in and see if she'd made it. But he felt ridiculous. He was just a random mechanic. No official family or friend. Security would likely turn him away. Still, he stepped out and trudged into the lobby. Warm air hit him, a stark contrast to the winter chill. A security guard, a burly man in a crisp uniform, eyed him. Jack approached the reception desk, where a young nurse was typing away. "Ma'am," Jack began softly, I'm looking to see if Clara Reynolds is all right." The nurse glanced up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Are you family?" Jack shook his head. "No, I just fixed the ambulance. I wanted to check if she made it." She gave him a once-over, noticing perhaps the sorrow etched on his face, the slight tremor in his hands. After a moment of hesitation, she said quietly, "She's stable. In ICU. But stable for now. That's all I can tell you." Relief flooded Jack's chest, and he thanked the nurse. For a fleeting second, he thought about asking to speak with the paramedics who'd come in with her, maybe confirm the last details of that rescue. But then he realized he had no reason to linger. He had no job, no money, no next step. The only hope was that at least someone else's life had been saved. Walking back to the truck, he reflected on how the day had started with him trying to hold everything together. Now, by mid-morning, he'd lost his livelihood. The memory of Cal's sneer replayed like a broken record in his head, fueling a quiet anger. But as he shifted the truck into gear, another realization sank in. If he had to choose all over again, he'd still have run out to fix that ambulance. He'd still have risked it, because that's who he was, or who he wanted to be. A man who did the right thing, cost be damned. Jack spent the afternoon at the local Veterans Resource Center, a modest building where he occasionally volunteered. The place smelled of old coffee and disinfectant, and a handful of vets lounged on worn couches, trading war stories no one else would understand. A tall, lean man named Russell "Russ" Baker oversaw the center, a retired Army captain who'd turned community organizer. Spotting Jack, Russ offered a half-smile of greeting. "You look like you've been through a ringer." "Everything all right?" Jack explained the situation in clipped sentences, leaning over a plastic table with scattered pamphlets about job training and mental health support. Russ listened attentively, arms folded. "I can't say I'm surprised. Man, Cal Barnes always struck me as the corporate type, but I didn't think he'd be that cold." Jack nodded grimly. "Me neither. But here we are." With a sigh, Russ reached into a file drawer labeled Job Leads. He pulled out a few battered printouts. Not much going on in Finley right now. The weather's had the logging crews on pause, the new supermarket is fully staffed, and the trucking company is cutting back hours. But maybe you can get something with the city's roads department. They always need drivers for snowplows. Jack took the papers, scanning job requirements. Most asked for specialized certifications he didn't have. At the next table, an older vet poured watery coffee into a styrofoam cup and wandered over. Hey, heard you were the fella that got fired for fixing an ambulance. That's tough luck. Jack frowned. Word traveled fast here. Just did what needed doing, he muttered. The older vet placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. Well, if you ask me, that took guts. Wish the world had more folks like that. Jack's eyes burned momentarily with gratitude. Thanks, he managed. Russ jotted down a name on a sticky note. Look, I've got a buddy, Tony Delgado, who runs a small delivery service. He's sometimes short on drivers. Maybe you can do part-time deliveries while you figure out your next step. Jack nodded, pocketing the note. It wasn't ideal, but rent was looming. Then he thought about Logan's after-school band fees, groceries, and the heating bill for their apartment. Every day of unemployment stacked the odds against them. Before Jack left, Russ insisted on packing him a small bag of canned goods and bread from the center's makeshift pantry. Embarrassment flared in Jack's chest, but refusing felt foolish. By the time he returned to the truck, snow had begun falling again, swirling in the wind. He stared at his reflection in the side mirror, unshaven, tired, and worn. I used to have a future, he murmured to himself, recalling the days when Merritt's garage was his inheritance and life was straightforward. Now, he was rummaging for day jobs, uncertain how to keep a roof over his son's head. He'd have to tell Logan soon, but not yet. Maybe something would break his way. Maybe. As he fired up the engine, a beep on his phone signaled a voicemail. It was from the hospital's main line, a nurse's voice saying, "Mr. Merritt, we're calling because Ms. Clara Reynolds, well, she's awake and asked for the mechanic who saved her life. If that's you, please call us back." Jack frowned in disbelief. Why would a wealthy woman in critical condition want to see him? The next morning, Jack found himself in the very same hospital lobby he'd visited the day before. This time, a nurse escorted him to the intensive care unit. He felt out of place, wearing his threadbare coat and scuffed boots as he tiptoed past hushed rooms and softly beeping monitors. Eventually, he was led to a private suite, and there, propped up on pillows, was Clara Reynolds. She looked frail, her hair an elegant silver that hinted at a once glamorous style. An IV line snaked from her arm, and a heart monitor beeped softly by the bedside. Still, her eyes were bright with a keen intelligence. The nurse introduced Jack, then slipped out. Clara beckoned him closer with a slight motion. "You must be the mechanic," she said, voice raspy. "Tommy, my paramedic, said if it weren't for you, that ambulance never would have made it here in time." Jack cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I just did what needed to be done. I'm glad you made it." His gaze flicked to a large vase of flowers on a nearby table, no doubt sent by well-wishers. Cards and balloons were scattered around the room, many with names of prominent community figures, people with influence far beyond anything Jack could imagine. Clara tilted her head, studying him. "Jack Merritt. Correct. I understand you're no longer at Cal's Auto Service. Did you lose your job because of me?" Jack swallowed hard. "I lost it because the owner and I didn't see eye to eye on how to handle emergencies. That's not your burden, ma'am." He tried to smile, but it felt hollow. "I just want you to recover well." She watched him in silence for a moment, then took a slow breath. "Jack, do you know who I am?" He shrugged. "I know your name is Clara Reynolds. The paramedic said your situation was critical." She allowed a small smile. "I run the Reynolds Foundation. It's a philanthropic organization that funds a lot of local initiatives, hospitals, education, you name it." Jack nodded, vaguely aware that Reynolds Foundation was a big deal. They funded new wings in hospitals, scholarships, and sometimes entire libraries. He hadn't realized the woman in the ambulance was that Clara Reynolds. Suddenly, he felt even more awkward, like a fish flopping on dry land. "Well, I'm glad you've got good care, ma'am." Clara's eyes flicked to the side, where a leather folder rested on a table. "The foundation does do a lot of good, but it relies on people, ordinary people with skill and compassion. I've been thinking about how I might repay your kindness." or rather, your sense of duty. Jack was about to protest that he didn't need anything, but she gently raised a hand. Let me finish. I have a fleet of vehicles, ambulances, transport vans, all part of our outreach programs. We've been looking for someone to oversee maintenance. Someone hands-on, who understands both community and machines. She nodded at him. You strike me as that kind of person. Jack stared, pulse pounding. Was she offering him a job? A real job? The notion felt too good to be true. But, ma'am, I'm just a mechanic. I don't know the first thing about running a fleet or dealing with big organizations. Clara smiled with a kindness that seemed genuine. You can learn, and from what I hear, you've got the best sort of reference saving my life. I'll have my assistant contact you with details. She settled back against the pillows, fatigue etched on her face. I don't want to push you into anything. Think about it. That's all I ask. Jack left the hospital in a daze, her assistant's card gripped in his hand. Could this be real, a chance to rebuild his life, to do something that mattered outside? The wind picked up as he headed to his truck, but for once he barely felt the cold. Hope stirred in him, a fragile bud poking through the frost. He knew it wouldn't be that simple, nothing ever was, but it was more than he had yesterday. Jack's fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number on Clara's assistant's card. Her name was Elise Holman, and her brisk voice reminded him of a school principal, warm but firm. She scheduled a meeting for the following morning at the Reynolds Foundation offices in downtown Findlay. Jack hung up the phone, half expecting some cosmic force to yank the rug out from under him. The idea of stepping into a polished corporate environment with well-heeled executives was daunting, but he had no time for self-doubt. That evening, he told Logan everything. From losing the job at Cal's to the possibility of a new position, the boy's eyes lit up. Dad, that's awesome. You can fix their ambulances. Right? Jack ruffled Logan's hair gently. Maybe. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It might not be as simple as turning a wrench. They celebrated quietly with peanut butter sandwiches because that was all they had. Logan insisted on making them, layering them with extra care. It felt like a feast, if only because it carried the promise of a better tomorrow. After dinner, Jack helped with the boys' math homework, but his mind drifted to the next day's meeting. He didn't own a suit, just a pair of clean trousers and a collared shirt from Carrie's funeral. He laid them out carefully, trying to ignore how the collar pinched around his neck. Early next morning, Jack drove downtown. The Reynolds Foundation building was a stark, modern structure of glass and steel. It had a wide lobby with a receptionist's desk shaped like a horseshoe. A tasteful holiday wreath hung on the wall, adding a touch of warmth to the otherwise businesslike air. After signing in, Jack took the elevator to the 8th floor, where Elise Holman awaited. She was in her mid-40s, wearing a tidy blazer, hair pulled back. Her demeanor was polite but efficient. Mr. Merritt, she said, shaking his hand. Ms. Reynolds would like to speak with you personally, but first I'd like to give you a brief overview of the position. She handed him a glossy folder with the Foundation's logo. It contained pictures of various vans, ambulances, and transport vehicles used for medical outreach, food delivery, and senior services. Elise explained that for years the Foundation had contracted out its maintenance to third-party garages, but the results were inconsistent. Now, they wanted to create an in-house team. Your role, Elise continued, would be to lead vehicle maintenance, train junior mechanics, manage scheduling, and ensure everything runs on time. Ms. Reynolds was impressed by how quickly you diagnosed and fixed that ambulance under pressure. Jack flipped through the folder, heart pounding. It's an incredible opportunity, he said, voice low. I'm just not sure I have the formal background. Elise smiled. What you did the other day is exactly the kind of real-world skill we're looking for. We can provide training on any administrative or logistical aspect you're missing. What we can't train is instincts. He nodded, scanning bullet points about a steady salary, benefits, even a potential scholarship program for family members. The numbers looked higher than anything he'd seen in years. It was more than a paycheck. It was a lifeline, maybe for him and Logan both. Elise then led him to Clara's private office. The corridor was lined with photos of charitable projects, a children's hospital wing, a rural clinic, a school library. Jack steeled himself, taking a final breath before stepping inside, hoping this wasn't all some dream about to crumble. Clara's office was simultaneously imposing and inviting. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a snow-blanketed Finley, and a grand wooden desk took center stage. Yet cozy chairs and warm lighting softened the space. Clara sat behind the desk, her posture still somewhat stiff, likely from her recovery. She motioned for Jack to sit in one of the plush chairs. "How are you feeling?" he asked, genuine concern coloring his tone. She laughed lightly. "Alive, thanks to you. My doctors say I was minutes away from a total system failure. My arteries were close to fully blocked. Hard to believe I let it get that far." Jack found himself nodding. He'd seen enough close calls in the Marines to know that sometimes you only realize you're in danger after you've barely survived. Clara folded her hands on the desk. "Elise briefed you, I imagine. You understand the scope of this position." Jack shifted in his seat. "She did. It's more than I expected. I'm honored, but also a bit intimidated." Clara's eyes seemed to peer right into him. "Jack, my father built this foundation on one principle: do for others what they can't do alone. We have the resources, but sometimes we lack the right people. People like you, someone who can handle unpredictable situations with skill and humanity." He thought about Logan and the possibility that this job might ensure the boy's stability. "I'm ready to try," he said, swallowing hard. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I won't let you down." Clara reached into a desk drawer and produced a slim folder. Inside were draft contracts, a list of responsibilities, and an offer letter with a starting salary that made Jack's head spin. "Review this. Ask questions. I want you to be fully comfortable before you commit." Jack skimmed the pages, noticing sections about emergency fleet response, vehicle oversight, and community outreach. One line caught his eye: Foundation Scholarship Program for Dependents. He wondered if that applied to Logan, if the boy might one day attend a better school or get a college scholarship. His throat constricted at the thought. "What about references?" he asked hesitantly, mindful of Cal's possible sabotage. Clara gave a wry smile. "I've done my own checking. Tommy Reyes and half the paramedic squad vouch for your mechanical expertise. And let's just say I have an inside track on your performance at that old garage." Jack felt a flush of gratitude, imagining that some co-workers must have spoken kindly about him behind Cal's back. He silently vowed never to forget that. After a moment, Clara said, "If you're ready, I can have Elise finalize your paperwork. I'd like you to start next Monday, if possible. We'll set up a short orientation." Jack exhaled. Yes, yes, I want this." Clara's tired face lit with a small, genuine smile. "Excellent. You'll report directly to me, though Elise handles day-to-day logistics. I want you to shape this department in a way that truly serves the community." They shook hands, and a wave of relief, excitement, and trepidation washed over Jack. Could it really be this simple? He glanced at Clara's pale complexion, reminded of the close call she had. Fate, coincidence. Call it what you will, but he'd acted on instinct, and it led him here. As he stood to leave, Clara coughed gently into a handkerchief. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." He nodded, too overwhelmed to form a proper response. When he left her office, Elise was already printing out formal documents, stamping them with the Foundation's emblem. And just like that, Jack Merritt's life veered onto a path he never saw coming. On the ride home, Jack's mind spun with possibilities. For so long, he'd been stuck, working for Cal's outfit under a constant cloud of financial stress. Now, there was a glimmer of genuine hope. He swung by the middle school to pick up Logan. The boy hopped into the passenger seat, scattering snow onto the worn floor mats. "How'd it go?" Dad Logan asked, voice trembling with excitement. Jack couldn't hold back a grin. They hired me, Logan whooped, pumping his fist in the air. The sight warmed Jack's heart. They drove home in better spirits than they'd had in months. But as Jack turned onto their street, he noticed a utility van parked by the curb in front of their building. Several men in orange vests were fiddling with something near the meter box. Dread twisted Jack's gut. Had he fallen behind on payments he didn't realize he parked and approached them? One of the men gave a curt nod. Hey, you live here. We got an order to shut off gas service to apartment 2B for non-payment. Jack's heart sank. The last gas bill had come 2 weeks ago. He'd thought he had more time. Listen, he began, rummaging through his wallet. I can pay part of it now. I just got a new job. The man shrugged apologetically. You'll have to call the main office. Logan stood by, his hopeful expression dimming. Jack guided him inside, where the air felt as cold as outside. The apartment's heat was gone. He quickly punched in the utility company's number on his phone, but it was already after hours, and he got an automated system. Rage and frustration bubbled in him. Here he was, about to start a decent job, but they couldn't even keep the heat on for one more day. Determined not to let this overshadow their triumph, Jack hurried around, pulling out extra blankets, plugging in a small electric space heater someone had gifted him last winter. We'll manage, he told Logan, trying to sound optimistic. Logan nodded, but in his eyes, Jack saw the flicker of disappointment, the sense that something good was always marred by a harsh reality. They made a quick dinner from the canned goods Russell had given Jack, heating soup on a hot plate that ran on the same electric circuit. The single dim lamp cast long shadows across the dingy walls. Dad, Logan ventured between spoonfuls. I know the new job will help, but how soon will we be okay? Jack sighed, considering how to phrase his answer. Well, I start Monday. I should get an advance or at least a first check within a couple weeks. I'll call the utility company tomorrow, see if we can work out a payment plan. It was a patchwork solution, but it was something. Tomorrow, he'd also look into more immediate ways to cover the backlog of bills. Maybe the Veterans Resource Center had emergency assistance, or perhaps he could find a one-off gig hauling scrap metal for the weekend. Jack didn't want his first day at the foundation overshadowed by the fear that he and Logan would freeze in their own apartment. Still, a kernel of relief remained at least. If all went well, their long-term prospects were finally looking up. They huddled under blankets on the couch, the small space heater humming. Logan eventually dozed off against Jack's shoulder. Jack stared at the swirling snow outside the window, thinking of Clara Reynolds recuperating in a warm hospital suite, connected to top-tier care. Life was strange. One day you're just a mechanic. The next you might save someone who holds your future in their hands. And the next, well, you're still broke, but maybe not for long. For the first time in months, Jack allowed a cautious hope to seep into his heart. Saturday morning arrived with a biting chill, the temperature dipping below zero. With 2 days before his new job started, Jack resolved to tackle the unpaid bill situation. He hopped into his old pickup, its engine protesting the cold, and headed to the utility company's local office. Logan in tow, they stood in line with a handful of other weary-faced customers, clutching overdue notices. A fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting a harsh glare. When they reached the counter, a bored-looking clerk scanned Jack's account. You're behind by $300, plus a reconnection fee, she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. We can set you up on a payment plan if you can pay at least $100 today. Jack's jaw tightened. He had maybe $40 left to his name. Can I pay something smaller? Like 50? The clerk shook her head. I'm sorry, but that's the policy. 100 minimum to reconnect. Dejected, Jack stepped aside to let the next person in line approach. Logan tugged at his sleeve, whispering, Dad, it's okay. I can sleep under blankets. Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He hated that his son had to show such resilience. They found a corner in the waiting area, rifling through potential solutions. If he borrowed from the Veterans Center's emergency fund, he might manage the 100, but it felt humiliating to ask for more help. Then again, what choice did he have as they left the office? Jack spotted a battered old sign pinned to a bulletin board, part-time snow shoveling. Pay by the hour. The phone number was half torn, but still legible. He shot a glance at Logan. We can do this. We'll shovel a few driveways. Gather up enough to cover the deposit. Logan gave a quick nod, determination lighting his gaze. I'm game, Dad. They spent the rest of the day driving around the quiet residential streets, stopping at houses with notably unshoveled driveways. Jack approached each door, politely asking if they needed help clearing the snow. Some folks scoffed or said they already had someone. Others took pity on them or recognized Jack from his father's old shop. They scraped together enough work to keep them busy for hours, the labor backbreaking but honest. By sunset, they'd earned about $60 in cash close, but still not enough. As they wrapped up the final driveway, an elderly woman named Mrs. Pat shuffled outside with her walker. Heard you're John Merritt's boy, she said, gazing at Jack's face. He once fixed my old Buick without charging me a dime. Said a lady on a tight budget shouldn't go without a running car. Tears pricked Jack's eyes. That was him. Glad he could help. She reached into her coat pocket, producing a crisp bill. This is for the work, plus a little extra. Pay it forward like your dad did. Jack thanked her, deeply moved. Back in the truck, he handed the money to Logan so the boy could count it. They now had 75, not quite 100. One more driveway tomorrow, Jack said softly, and we'll have enough to call the utility company. Logan nodded, shivering despite the heater's best efforts. They'd have to push through one more night of cold, but at least the end was in sight. As they pulled onto their street, the swirling snow in the headlights felt a bit less menacing. They were inching toward a small victory, step by grueling step. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, the sky a crisp blue. Despite the frigid air, Jack felt lighter. They only needed one more decent driveway job to hit the $100 mark. He and Logan set out early, scanning the streets for fresh snow accumulation. Half an hour later, they spotted a large corner lot with a wide driveway that looked like it hadn't been touched in days. Jack pulled over, hopped out, and rang the bell. A gruff man opened the door. Yeah, he said, eyeing them suspiciously. Jack offered his usual pitch. Sir, we're offering snow shoveling services. Driveway, walkway, steps. We can do it all for a fair price. The man frowned but then waved an arm behind him. Fine, $25, but you'd better do a good job. Jack nodded, resisting the urge to haggle. They needed the money. The man watched from a window as Jack and Logan dug in. The driveway was huge and the snow was packed with ice near the bottom, making every shovel load heavy and punishing. Even Logan, determined as he was, started to tire quickly. After an hour, they'd cleared maybe 2/3. Jack's shoulders ached, and he wondered if his back would hold up for the new job. Still, the image of Logan sleeping in the cold spurred him on. Another half hour passed before they finally finished. Jack trudged back to the door, boots caked with snow. The homeowner emerged, looked over the cleared driveway, then pressed a worn 20 and a 5 into Jack's gloved hand. All right, he said gruffly. That'll do. Before Jack could respond, the door slammed. Logan waited by the truck, exhaling plumes of cold breath, but he broke into a tired grin when Jack waved the money. We did it, Dad, Logan said, teeth chattering. We can pay the deposit. On the drive back, they swung by a gas station so Jack could buy cheap hot chocolates. It was a small reward for their labor, but Logan sipped it like a king's feast. When they got home, Jack immediately called the utility company's weekend hotline, prepared to hold the phone to his ear for hours if needed. Miraculously, a representative picked up within minutes. Jack explained he could pay the $100 deposit at once. After some clicking of keys, the representative scheduled a reconnection for Monday morning. Congratulations, Mr. Merritt, she said flatly. Your service will resume by noon tomorrow. Jack allowed himself a brief moment of pride. They'd earned enough to keep the heat on. That was a victory. Sure, it was meager, and they still had a mountain of bills, but at least Logan wouldn't have to freeze tonight. As they turned on the space heater in the living room, the difference in mood was palpable. Logan even decided to practice a few notes on the battered trumpet they'd saved from Carrie's belongings. The muffled notes, while not exactly melodious, filled the apartment with a sense of possibility. Yet beneath that sense of accomplishment, Jack felt the looming reality of Monday's new job. He'd be stepping into a world he barely understood: foundation budgets, fleet coordination, maybe even public relations. Would they see him as a naive ex-Marine and over his head, or would they accept him late that night, lying on the couch while Logan slept in the bedroom? Jack stared at the ceiling. He wouldn't let these doubts sabotage him. Tomorrow was a fresh start, the first step toward something bigger, and this time he'd make sure no one took away what he'd worked so hard to protect. Monday arrived with a flutter of nerves in Jack's stomach. He rose before dawn, quickly shaving and slipping into the best clothes he had: a worn button-down and slacks that had seen better days. He quietly tiptoed into the bedroom to check on Logan, who stirred awake. Good luck, Dad, the boy said through a yawn. Knock 'em dead. Jack ruffled Logan's hair, whispering back, Thanks, kiddo. I'll do my best. The truck's engine sputtered, but eventually roared to life. The roads were still icy from the previous night's frost, but Jack made it downtown in time. The Reynolds Foundation building looked as imposing as ever, but its glass facade shimmered under the sunrise, hinting at new beginnings. Inside, a security guard at the front desk smiled politely, handing Jack a visitor's pass. They said you're expected on the 12th floor. Mr. Merritt. Jack's heart hammered as he entered the elevator. The ding announcing each floor sounded strangely magnified, as if everything was amplified by his heightened anxiety. Stepping out onto the 12th floor, he found a corridor lined with frosted glass doors, each bearing titles like logistics, community outreach, and legal affairs. At the end stood a larger door labeled Fleet Management. A wave of relief washed over him. That had to be him. He was met by Elise Holman, who gave him a cordial nod. Morning, Jack. Ready to see your new office. She led him inside, flipping on the lights. The space was modest but comfortable: a desk, a computer, a pair of guest chairs, and large windows overlooking the city. On one wall hung a framed aerial photo of the Foundation's main garage facility, where dozens of vans and ambulances were parked in neat rows. A gentle swirl of excitement stirred in Jack. This was all so different from the grime and chaos of Cal's shop. Elise provided him with a stack of orientation materials, HR forms, employee benefit guides, and a rundown of the day's agenda. First up, we'll introduce you to the maintenance team on site, she explained. Then Ms. Reynolds wants you at a planning meeting with the finance department around noon. After that, you'll visit our main fleet garage across town. Jack blinked, already feeling his schedule fill up. That's quite a day, he said, forcing a smile. Elise escorted him down to a lower level, where a group of mechanics were at work in a spacious, well-equipped workshop. A few heads turned as they noticed the newcomer in business casual attire, clearly trying not to come across like some clueless manager. Miguel Sanchez, a lead mechanic, stepped forward, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag. So you're the new boss? Huh, he said, not unkindly. Jack offered a handshake. Jack Merritt. I'm still a grease monkey at heart, so boss might be a stretch. Miguel's wary expression softened into a grin. Well, let's see if you can handle a torque wrench. Within minutes, Jack found himself discussing engine calibrations with the team, taking note of their current workload, the condition of certain vans, and the frustrations they faced with past third-party contractors. As the morning wore on, he realized that these people were no different from him, passionate about getting vehicles running, but stuck in a system that sometimes neglected their input. Maybe he could actually make a difference here. By noon, Jack had settled into a cautious rhythm, Elise whisked him off to a conference room for a meeting with finance and logistics managers. The large table was ringed by individuals in neat attire, each tapping on laptops or scanning spreadsheets. Marcus Holloway, the finance director, started off with a monotone voice, presenting slide after slide of budget breakdowns for the foundation's fleet operations. We've allocated X amount for maintenance, Y for spare parts, Z for expansion projects. He droned, projecting colorful charts onto a screen. Jack tried to keep up, but the jargon was thicker than engine sludge overhead allocations, capital expenditures, ROI analyses. He forced himself to pay attention, occasionally jotting notes in a small notepad. He could almost feel the question burning in the manager's eyes. Who is this guy? He looked more comfortable holding a socket wrench than flipping through spreadsheets. Eventually, Clara Reynolds entered, moving with a slightly frail grace. She settled at the head of the table, a folder in hand, her face still pale from her recent health scare. Afternoon, everyone, she began, scanning the room. When her gaze landed on Jack, she offered a hint of a smile. I know this is a lot to take in, Jack, but I want you to see how the foundation operates from every angle. One of the finance staff, a younger man with meticulously combed hair, raised a question about whether the new in-house maintenance approach would truly save money. Couldn't we continue outsourcing? It might be simpler. Clara nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Jack. Why don't you share your perspective? Feeling like a deer in headlights. Jack cleared his throat. He thought about the old days at Merritt's garage, how his father used to let neighbors pay in installments to keep their cars running. Well, he began tentatively, outsourcing can be cheaper if you're looking purely at immediate costs. But if something breaks down on the road, especially an ambulance or a transport van carrying medical supplies, that immediate cost saving can turn into a huge liability delays, potential harm to patients, reputational damage. He paused, glancing at Marcus and the other managers. When we keep maintenance in-house, we can monitor every vehicle closely. We can do preventive repairs instead of waiting for a breakdown. That consistency, in my experience, leads to fewer long-term expenses. Plus, he added, voice strengthening. The people working on those vehicles will care more. They're not just some random contractor. They're part of the foundation, part of the mission. A silence followed. Clara locked eyes with Marcus, a subtle tilt to her head. Marcus finally said, It's an interesting viewpoint. We need to see numbers to back it up. Clara chuckled softly. Then let's gather those numbers. But for now, I'm inclined to trust the man who literally saved my life by understanding how critical every minute is when a vehicle fails. A flush of warmth spread through Jack's chest. He felt out of his depth, but Clara's support steadied him. As the meeting wound down, Elise passed around a schedule for the next few weeks, detailing tasks like develop maintenance protocols, train additional staff, and evaluate replacement of older vehicles. Jack's to-do list stretched to the horizon, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel dread. He felt possibility. At the end of the meeting, as people filed out, Clara gave Jack a gentle pat on the arm. Good work, she said simply, her tone maternal. Jack nodded, remembering the countless times he dreamed of a break like this. Outside the conference room window, the snow glinted under midday sun, and Jack realized that sometimes a single moment like helping a stalled ambulance could spark an entire lifetime of new beginnings. Jack stood in his new office, surrounded by half-open boxes of tools and paperwork, when Elise popped her head in with a wide grin. Good timing, she said. I was just about to show you our main fleet facility across town. Jack nodded, already feeling the day's intensity. The morning had been a blur of spreadsheets, orientation, and fielding curious glances from staff who wondered who this ex-military mechanic was and why Clara trusted him so implicitly. They rode together in a company SUV, winding through Findlay's busy midday traffic. Elise pulled into a long driveway that led to an expansive fenced property. Beyond the gates, Jack saw rows upon rows of white vehicles ambulances, transport vans for senior citizens, even a few large trucks used for delivering medical supplies or food to outlying areas. A giant sign read Reynolds Foundation Community Fleet Hub. Elise explained how the fleet served over a dozen counties, providing everything from rural dialysis transport to emergency response in snowstorms. Jack could tell the foundation took pride in this place, but something gnawed at him who had been overseeing it all before. The facility looked professional, but also oddly impersonal, more like a corporate storage lot than a vibrant community operation. They entered the main garage building, an enormous space where the echo of an impact wrench reverberated. Mechanics in crisp uniforms bustled about, examining an ambulance's undercarriage, restocking medical kits, or test running an engine. Elise gestured for Jack to follow. "There's someone I want you to meet," she said, leading him past rows of vehicles under various states of repair. At a far corner, a tall man with salt and pepper hair was hunched over a diagnostic machine, eyes narrowed. He wore a uniform with a small lead tech patch. Elise coughed politely to get his attention. "Brett, this is Jack Merritt," she announced. "He's our new director of fleet maintenance and community outreach." Brett straightened, wiping his hands on a rag before offering a firm handshake. Jack noted the lines around his eyes. He looked like a man who'd seen plenty of stress. "Pleasure to meet you," Brett said, though there was a hint of skepticism in his voice. "You must be the hero mechanic, Miss Reynolds keeps talking about." Jack tried to deflect. "Just a guy who saw an ambulance in trouble," he mumbled, scanning the diagnostics panel Brett had been studying. It displayed a complicated readout for an engine timing issue. Brett raised an eyebrow, apparently gauging Jack's mechanical knowledge. "Mind if I ask what you do about a persistent misfire on cylinder 3 after changing plugs and wires?" he asked bluntly. Elise's eyes flicked between them, and Jack realized Brett was testing him. "Might check the ignition coil or run a compression test to rule out a deeper valve issue," Jack replied, crossing his arms. "Sometimes an injector flush helps if the coil checks out." Brett's mouth twitched in a grudging grin. "Fair enough. We've tried everything but the compression test." "Good call." Elise gently slid her hand onto Jack's shoulder. "Brett basically ran this place alone after our previous manager retired. We're hoping you can lighten his load and maybe shift our approach from reactive to proactive." Brett nodded slowly, his posture relaxing. "I could use the help. We've had breakdowns and crucial deliveries too many times. Miss Reynolds wants a real improvement in reliability." Jack's chest tightened, recalling the meeting with the finance team. He was their gamble, a newcomer with a big heart but uncertain managerial skills. Elise chimed in. "Jack will also be focusing on how to integrate local communities. Ms. Reynolds has a vision forging stronger ties so people in remote areas learn basic maintenance. That way, when something breaks down miles from a shop, they can handle it. We want to prevent tragedies." Brett chuckled. "That's a tall order. Most folks around here have never touched a torque wrench, let alone worked on specialized vehicles." Jack shrugged. "I've taught raw recruits before. This might not be so different." Inside, though, he wondered if he was in over his head, juggling mechanical issues, a suspicious staff, new administrative duties, and a broader community mission felt like wrestling an octopus. Still, he reminded himself that he'd faced worse. If he could keep an ailing helicopter running in the desert, perhaps he could keep these vans running in Wyoming's winter. As they left, Jack spotted a partial blueprint on a whiteboard, listing service schedules and critical routes. It was a patchwork system at best, a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. He studied it briefly, already thinking about ways to implement a more organized, preventive maintenance plan. Elise guided him back to the SUV, promising to set up more in-depth tours. Jack gazed over the fleet once more, half exhilarated, half terrified. This was no ordinary job. It was a mission. And tomorrow, he'd discover just how many eyes were on him, some friendly, some not. Late that evening, Jack pulled into his apartment parking lot, mentally exhausted but oddly energized. The reconnection for their gas service had finally happened, so at least the apartment was warm. He found Logan at the kitchen table, still doing homework under a yellowed overhead light. The boy looked up, eyebrows raised in anticipation. So, how was it Jack dropped his coat on a chair, releasing a slow breath? Big, complicated, lots of vehicles, lots of new faces. He warmed up some leftover soup, grateful they had heat again. But I think I can make a difference, he added, allowing himself a small surge of confidence. Logan beamed. That's awesome. Did you meet any new friends? Jack chuckled. Not sure about friends yet. There's a lead mechanic named Brett who seems decent, and Elise is helpful. Miss Reynolds is giving me a lot of trust. The mention of Clara Reynolds brought a flicker of gratitude. Jack still felt indebted to her for taking a chance on a mechanic she barely knew. After dinner, Logan shared highlights from his school day, including a band practice where he'd finally nailed the high notes on a trumpet piece he'd struggled with. Jack nodded encouragingly, all the while thinking that soon, with a stable paycheck, he might afford actual music lessons for the kid. They talked about the possibility of a better future, no more rummaging for rent, no more skipping meals. But as he helped Logan pack up for bed, a call flashed on Jack's phone. The ID read unknown, but he answered out of habit. A hesitant voice said, "Mr. Merritt, this is Tommy Reyes, the paramedic. I got your number from the hospital staff." Jack's eyes lit with recognition. He hadn't spoken to Tommy in weeks, not since the morning of the ambulance fiasco. "Hey, Tommy," he said, stepping into the hallway for privacy. "How you holding up?" Tommy exhaled a laugh. "I'm good. Actually, I'm calling because I heard rumors about your new gig with Ms. Reynolds. Thought I'd say congrats. Also, something else might interest you." He paused and went as though weighing his words. "I was on a run today, and we had a breakdown in one of the older ambulances. We managed to limp back to base, but I noticed they'd taken it to, guess who, Cal Barnes. He's apparently bidding on some big maintenance contract behind the scenes." Jack stiffened. Cal was still in the picture, possibly trying to undercut the in-house approach. "How's that possible?" "The foundation wants to run maintenance internally," he muttered, moving closer to the apartment window. Snow drifted in the street lamp glow. "Exactly," Tommy said. "But from what I hear, Cal's been schmoozing certain board members or donors, claiming he can handle emergency fleets cheaper than the foundation can. I thought you should know." The idea made Jack's stomach churn. He'd just begun this job, and if Cal succeeded, it could undermine everything. "Thanks for the heads up, Tommy. I'll look into it." They exchanged a few more words, mostly about how grateful Tommy was that the new approach might help paramedics get better vehicles. After hanging up, Jack stared at the phone, heart pounding. Another wave of conflict loomed. Cal had never lacked ambition or cunning. The man might have been petty enough to fire Jack over a single belt, but it seemed he also wanted a slice of the foundation's business. Returning to the living room, Jack found Logan half asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over him. He gently nudged the boy to the bedroom. "Come on, kiddo. You'll get a crick in your neck," he joked. As Logan trudged to bed, Jack flicked off the main light. He settled onto the couch himself, mind racing. With Cal meddling behind the scenes, Jack's mission might be threatened before it even fully took shape. For a moment, he stared at the battered coffee table, remembering how quickly he'd lost the old job. Then he glanced at the Reynolds Foundation ID badge in his wallet. He refused to be blindsided again. If Cal wanted a fight, Jack would be ready. Early the next morning, Jack arrived at the Reynolds Foundation building with determination fueling his stride. Snowflakes fluttered in the gray sky, the wind biting at his cheeks, but he barely noticed. He'd scheduled a quick meeting with Clara to confirm that everything was still aligned with the in-house plan. While waiting in the reception area, he scrolled through his phone, scanning local business news. Sure enough, he found a short article stating that Barnes Auto Group was expanding its operations, aiming to secure government and private fleet contracts. Clara was behind her desk when he entered, a cozy throw blanket over her lap. She still looked pale but flashed a welcoming smile. "Morning, Jack. You're in early." Jack drew a breath, launching into the update about Tommy's tip. He watched Clara's expression shift, a steely glint appearing in her eyes. Cal Barnes, she murmured. He's been trying to pitch the idea of outsourcing to a few on our board. Claims his modern facilities can do it for a fraction of the cost. Jack swallowed. And if enough board members listen, they might override the plan we're putting in place. Right. He hated how naive he sounded. Clara nodded. Technically, yes. The board has oversight on major budget allocations. However, I hold significant sway. If you can demonstrate the value of an in-house system and do it quickly, they'll have no reason to consider Barnes. That means results. Jack nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. I won't let you down. Clara's eyes softened. I know, but just know that Cal is persistent. He'll try to find any weakness. With that, she slid a sealed folder across the desk. In here, you'll find the next quarter's projections for our fleet needs, plus cost comparisons from previous years. Use these to refine your maintenance strategy. Show the board we can be efficient and reliable. He thanked her, heart thumping with a mix of gratitude and tension. Before leaving, he hesitated. How's your health? Miss Reynolds, are you feeling okay? A faint smile crossed her lips. I'm better, thanks to some lifestyle changes. But let's not pretend I dodged a bullet. The doctors say I'll need to manage stress and keep my blood pressure down. She tapped the folder. So let's keep crises to a minimum. Shall we? Jack returned to his office and spent the next few hours poring over the data. The numbers were dense: fuel costs, repair expenses, average downtime, emergency call frequency. He realized that if the vehicles were serviced methodically, breakdowns could be slashed dramatically, but he'd need a strong plan to convince any wavering board members. By midday, he had a rough strategy mapped out: a rotating maintenance schedule ensuring each vehicle got a thorough inspection every 2 weeks, a parts inventory system to address wear and tear, and a new training initiative for remote communities to handle minor fixes. It was ambitious but feasible if the staff cooperated. He bounded downstairs to share the plan with Brett and the mechanics. They gathered around a large whiteboard as Jack outlined the concept. Some were intrigued. Others looked skeptical. That's a lot of rotation, one mechanic said. Arms crossed. We're already stretched. Jack nodded. I get it, but if we fix small issues before they become big ones, we'll reduce overall workload. You'll spend fewer nights handling emergencies. The mention of fewer late-night calls earned some grudging nods. Brett rubbed his chin. We can try. Let's see how it pans out. As the mechanics dispersed, Jack caught a fleeting sense of optimism. People seemed willing to give his ideas a shot, but he knew time was short. Cal would be working angles behind the scenes. If a major breakdown or incident happened soon, it could validate Cal's claims that the Foundation couldn't manage a fleet this large. Jack squared his shoulders, determined to outpace any sabotage. The die was cast. He was in a race, whether he liked it or not. That same afternoon, Jack's office phone rang with an unfamiliar extension. He picked up to hear a crackly yet urgent voice on the other end. Mr. Merritt, this is Nurse Hatfield over at St. Agnes Clinic in Oakhurst. One of the Foundation's transport vans broke down on the highway. The driver said the engine just died, and there's a patient inside who needs dialysis. Jack's stomach lurched. Where exactly are they? The nurse rattled off a location: a remote stretch of highway flanked by snow-laden pine forests, easily an hour's drive from Findlay. They said they called the Foundation dispatch, but no one answered. We got your direct line from Tommy Reyes. Jack grimaced. The in-house dispatch system wasn't fully organized yet. This was exactly the kind of fiasco that gave Cal ammunition. He shot to his feet, grabbing a jacket. Okay, I'll head that way right now. Can you stay on the line with the driver if possible? Tell them to remain calm and keep the patient warm. Nurse Hatfield agreed, her voice tense, then hung up to attend to other tasks. Jack hurried downstairs, passing by Brett's station. I need a service truck, loaded with basic engine parts and a portable heater. He barked. Brett blinked, then nodded curtly. leading him to a utility pickup the foundation used for roadside repairs. Within minutes, Jack was on the road, the service truck's engine growling over salt-sprinkled highways. The sky was an ominous gray, hinting at another snowfall. He flipped on the radio to get weather updates, but static greeted him. His mind spun with worst-case scenarios. The van's engine could be a total loss, the patient's health deteriorating in the cold. That single breakdown might confirm every critic's worst suspicions about trusting an in-house system still in its infancy. He pressed the accelerator, wipers swishing away light flurries. After about 40 minutes, the traffic thinned, giving way to a rugged, tree-lined expanse. The highway curved, and soon he spotted a hazard light blinking on the shoulder. Pulling up behind the disabled van, he switched on his own hazard lights. The driver, a middle-aged woman in a foundation jacket, stood outside, frantically waving. Behind her, a frail-looking man was bundled in blankets inside the van. Jack hopped out. Jack Merritt, Fleet Operations. What happened? She exhaled relief, pointing at the van's hood. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. We lost heat too. Jack grabbed his flashlight and popped the hood, scanning the engine. Radiator hoses looked intact, coolant level fine, battery connections tight. A quick glance at the serpentine belt showed no breaks, but the smell of burned oil lingered, suggesting a deeper internal issue. Could be the fuel pump or a failing alternator. While he fiddled with the parts in the service truck, the driver explained the patient's situation. Mr. Alvarez needs dialysis. He can't miss today's session. The clinic is only 20 miles from here. Jack pressed a portable heater into her hands. Keep him warm, he said, handing over an emergency blanket as well. I'll try to get this engine running. If not, we'll figure a tow or a ride. She nodded, hustling back inside to comfort the patient. Jack tested the fuel lines. They seemed okay. Then he discovered a loose connection on the alternator bracket, as though a bolt had sheared off. Odd it didn't look worn. It looked tampered with. Anxiety spiked in his chest. Could this be sabotage? He rummaged in the toolbox for a replacement bolt, cursing under his breath. If it was sabotage, who would do it? And how the foundation garage was usually monitored. But not all vehicles were parked there overnight. He replaced the bracket, tightened everything, and tried the ignition. The van groaned, then sputtered. Another attempt, and it roared to life, though the engine ran rough. Not perfect, but maybe enough to get them off the highway. Jack slammed the hood, waving the driver. Let's get moving. I'll follow close in the service truck. If it fails again, we'll do a quick tow. The driver helped the patient settle in as the engine idled. With adrenaline coursing through him, Jack watched the van pull onto the road. He tailed it, hazard lights on, praying it would hold up. The next 20 miles felt like crossing a minefield. But the van limped all the way to St. Agnes Clinic, where a medical team rushed out to wheel the patient inside. Jack exhaled in relief. Crisis averted for now. But as he stared at the hood, the suspicion of sabotage clung to him like a dark cloud. If someone was deliberately causing breakdowns, the stakes had just escalated, and it didn't take a genius to guess who might stand to benefit from such disasters. Jack returned to the foundation late in the evening, the winter sky already swallowed by darkness. He parked the service truck in a designated bay and hurried inside, looking for Brett. He found him leaning over a repair log, face etched with concern. Heard about the breakdown, Brett said, without looking up. Everything okay? Jack sighed. I managed a temporary fix, but it might have been sabotage. The alternator bracket bolt was cleanly sheared, as if done on purpose. Brett's hand froze over a line of text. He glanced up sharply. That's a serious accusation. Are you sure it wasn't just wear and tear? Jack shook his head, pulling out the broken bolt from his jacket pocket. It showed a suspiciously clean break near the threads, not the typical frayed edges of metal fatigue. Brett studied it, brow furrowing. Damn it, he muttered. This can't be a coincidence. They moved to a quieter corner. Jack explained the tip from Tommy. how Cal Barnes might be eyeing a big contract, and how any pattern of breakdowns would strengthen Cal's argument that the Foundation couldn't handle its own fleet. Brett nodded grimly. You think some inside person is messing with vehicles to prove we're incompetent? Jack grimaced. I can't rule it out. Or maybe Cal has ways to access them off-site. I don't want to leap to conspiracies, but the timing is too perfect. Brett rubbed the back of his neck. Tension thick in his posture. We'll need to ramp up security, maybe install cameras in the parking areas, and do thorough checkovers of every van. Jack leaned forward, voice low. Exactly. Let's do a full inspection tomorrow. If there's evidence of tampering on multiple vehicles, we bring it straight to Ms. Reynolds. They emerged from the workshop and found Elise waiting in the hallway, a phone in her hand. Are you two okay? She asked, eyes flicking with worry. Jack recapped the day's events. Elise shook her head. That's the last thing we need. The board's next quarterly review is in a few weeks, and they'll want to see improvements, not sabotage. She paused and glancing at Jack. Mrs. Reynolds is meeting a few board members for dinner tomorrow, some informal gathering to discuss future budgets. If you have anything concrete, she could use it in conversation. She's on your side, but she needs facts. Brett shut down the lights in the workshop, shoulders sagging. I'll coordinate the checks at dawn. Jack, you'd better get some rest. Been a long day. Jack rubbed his temples, acknowledging a dull ache behind his eyes. Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks, Brett. Elise nodded as well. We'll get through this. Don't let one incident derail your progress. But as Jack headed for his truck, his mind whirled. If sabotage was a real threat, that meant someone was actively targeting these vehicles. One breakdown could cost a patient's life. Worse, if the Foundation's leadership lost faith in him, it could cost him everything he'd worked for, including the stability he was finally offering Logan. He drove home under the orange glow of streetlights, knees jittery. The usual hush of his apartment greeted him, Logan already asleep. Jack quietly brushed snow off his boots and eased onto the couch, mind too wired for rest. As the hours passed, he replayed the breakdown scene on that lonely highway. He pictured the patient's worry, the driver's desperation, and his father's mantra about fixing what needed fixing. But this was more than a lone repair job. He was in the center of a conflict that could shape entire communities' access to medical care. The notion both frightened and emboldened him. He promised himself he'd face it head-on, no matter the cost. Despite the restless night, Jack arrived at the Foundation's fleet facility before sunrise. The sky was a cold purple, the moon still hanging low over the snowy lots. Brett was already there, organizing a small group of mechanics, each armed with flashlights and clipboards. They planned to inspect every vehicle, checking belts, bolts, wiring anything that could be deliberately tampered with. By 7, the entire row of ambulances and vans lined up in the main hangar, engines cold, headlights glinting in the fluorescent light. Jack assigned each mechanic a section. He took the oldest ambulances for himself, suspecting those might be prime targets. The methodical process of scanning each inch of the engine compartment, running quick function tests, and logging findings gave Jack a strange sense of calm. For a moment, it was just him and the machines, a reminder of simpler days. Halfway through, a younger mechanic named Andrea waved him over to a mid-mileage van used primarily for delivering dialysis patients. "Look at this," she muttered, shining her flashlight at the brake lines. Jack peered closer. A tiny nick in the rubber, barely visible, but enough to cause a slow leak if pressure built. Normal wear or sabotage. Andrea shrugged. Could go either way, but it's suspicious. The rest of the line is pristine. He took photos, documenting the damage. Another mechanic discovered a fluid reservoir cap left slightly loose, not enough to leak all over, but enough to cause a slow drip under certain conditions. By midday, they had found several questionable issues, small but concerning. It's a pattern, Brett said grimly. compiling the notes, random corners cut, bolts not fully torqued. It's not the same method each time, which makes it look accidental. But I don't buy it, Jack agreed. We'll submit these findings to Miss Reynolds. In the meantime, let's fix everything right now. They spent the next few hours replacing compromised parts, tightening loose connections, and ensuring each vehicle was fit for service. As the team wrapped up, Jack felt a surge of respect for these mechanics. They worked doggedly despite the gloom of potential sabotage. We should do random spot checks every week, he suggested, and Brett nodded, exhaustion creeping into his face. No sooner had they finished than Jack's phone buzzed. Elise was on the line. Jack, Ms. Reynolds asked if you could join her for an off-site dinner with certain board members tonight. It's at the Riverside Lodge, around 7 p.m. Jack cast a quick glance at the clock. It was already 3 p.m. Sure. Do I need to bring anything? Elise laughed lightly. Maybe just a tie. She wants you to summarize our progress and address any concerns. Jack swallowed. He hadn't worn a tie in years, aside from Carrie's funeral. He stammered an agreement, then ended the call. Brett clapped him on the back. Go home. Get ready. We'll handle the rest here. Jack managed a small grin. Thanks. Let's hope I don't trip over my words. He arrived home just as Logan was walking in from school. Dad, you're in a hurry, the boy noted, seeing Jack rifling through the closet for something respectable. Yeah, Jack explained. I've got a fancy dinner with Ms. Reynolds and some board members. Got to talk about the new maintenance plan. Logan tilted his head. You'll do great. You fixed that ambulance in a snowstorm. A dinner is nothing. Jack smiled, patting Logan's shoulder. The boy's confidence was contagious. He found an old tie from the back of the closet, faded but functional, and donned his best dress shirt. An anxious swirl churned in his gut. This meeting could define whether the board would ignore any sabotage rumors and let him proceed, or if they'd give Cal a second look. Clutching his keys, he headed out, calling back to Logan. There's leftover stew for dinner. Okay? The boy flashed a thumbs up. I got it. Knock 'em dead. Dad. The Riverside Lodge sat on the edge of Finley's main river. The building itself, an elegant stone structure with twinkling lights strung across wooden beams. It exuded old-world charm, the kind of place where deals were made over fine wine and steak. Jack pulled into the lot feeling more like a high school student crashing a fancy gala than a guest. Still, he squared his shoulders, stepping out into the crisp night air. Inside, a hostess guided him past a roaring fireplace to a private dining room. Clara stood near the door, draped in a stylish shawl. She greeted him with a warm smile, though he could see a hint of strain in her eyes. Around a long table, 5 board members engaged in polite chatter. They wore suits and dresses, silverware arranged in neat lines before them. A few glances flicked toward Jack, measuring him up. Clara introduced him Dr. Miriam Rowe, a retired surgeon, Trevor Dalton, a businessman with real estate ties, Sylvia Hughes, a philanthropic consultant, and Marvin Killian, a local official. The 5th board member, Evelyn Cooper, was absent, apparently delayed by a flight. They all shook Jack's hand, exuding varying degrees of warmth. Dr. Rowe was openly kind, while Dalton's handshake felt stiff, his expression guarded. Once everyone settled, the waitress poured water and took orders. Clara raised a glass. Before we dine, I want to express gratitude to Mr. Merritt here, Jack, for stepping into a challenging role with our community fleet. A polite smattering of applause followed, though Dalton merely tapped his fingers on the table. Eyes veiled, Clara continued. He's implementing a proactive maintenance plan. Our vehicles should see fewer breakdowns and lower costs over time. Dalton cleared his throat, leaning forward. Glad to hear, but let's be candid. A little bird told me we've had issues with sabotage and an ambulance breakdown that nearly left a dialysis patient stranded. Jack's pulse kicked. Clara motioned for him to respond. He set down his water glass, recalling the new bullet points he'd prepared. Yes, there was a breakdown. We fixed it on site. Regarding sabotage, we've found suspicious damage on a few vehicles. Bolts loosened, fluid lines nicked. We're tightening security and performing thorough inspections. The sabotage angle isn't confirmed, but we're taking it seriously. Dalton's lips tightened. Must I remind you that the Foundation's mandate is to serve the community, not make headlines with fiascos? Clara intervened gently. Trevor, we appreciate your honesty, but let's not jump to concluding it's a fiasco. Jack's preventing worse outcomes. Better we discover sabotage early than let it cripple us. Doctor, Rowe offered a supportive smile to Jack. In my medical practice, we always said it's better to catch an infection early than treat a full-blown sepsis. This approach of early detection and thorough checks might be more cost-effective in the long run. Sylvia Hughes, the philanthropic consultant, nodded. But how do we measure that success tangibly? Some board members, especially those absent tonight, might ask for data. Numbers. Jack swallowed. I'm compiling performance metrics. In the last 2 weeks, we averted potential breakdowns on several vans by discovering faults. We're also rolling out a new inventory system to ensure parts are on hand. Once these measures are in place, we'll track how many breakdowns we prevent, how many hours of downtime we save, and how it affects patient service. That data will be in the next quarterly report. Silence hung. Then Marvin Killian, the local official, asked, what about competition? I've heard rumors that Barnes Auto Group offers maintenance at a lower cost. Jack felt the room's energy tighten, eyes shifting to Clara. She quietly turned to Jack again, a sign that she trusted him to speak. Cal Barnes runs a modern shop. Sure, Jack said evenly. But an ambulance or dialysis van can't always wait in a queue behind consumer vehicles. In-house means we prioritize critical services first. It's not just about cost, it's about reliability and community focus. Dalton arched a brow. Community focus is noble, but at what price the Foundation must remain fiscally responsible? Clara's lips thinned, but she held her composure. That's why we have Jack. He's bridging both worlds. I'm confident we'll see a significant reduction in emergencies and an increase in efficiency. The waitress arrived with plates, diffusing tension for the moment. As conversation moved to safer topics like hospital expansions and scholarship funds, Jack let his shoulders relax slightly, yet he noted how Dalton shot him the occasional skeptical glance. By the end of the meal, Dr. Rowe and Sylvia Hughes seemed warm to Jack's plan, while Marvin Killian remained neutral, waiting for results. Dalton, though, was a wild card. As the group filed out, Dalton approached Jack briefly. Look, you seem like a good man, he said, voice low. But Barnes's proposal claims to save the Foundation at least 20%. If your new system fails even once, or if sabotage rumors continue, I'll push the board to consider him. Jack forced a polite nod, adrenaline spiking. He watched Dalton walk away and realized that in many ways, the real fight was just beginning. Jack left Riverside Lodge feeling both triumphant and uneasy. Triumphant because at least some board members believed in him. Uneasy because the potential for sabotage and the looming Barnes threat remained very real. Snow drifted in gentle flurries as he drove home, his mind buzzing with everything said over dinner. He wondered if Clara's health could handle more tension. She'd taken a quiet but firm stance for him, a stance that could cost her political capital if he failed. The next morning brought a swirl of activity at the Foundation. Elise flagged him down before he'd even set foot in his office. News travels fast, she said, handing him a local paper. The headline read, Community Transport Saved in Nick of Time. But is the fleet stretched too thin? A photo of a stranded van, presumably the one Jack fixed, graced the front page. The article pointed out the near-disaster scenario, but also questioned whether the new in-house system was fully ready. Jack skimmed the piece, stomach in knots. He saw the byline belonged to a local columnist known for sensational angles. This isn't great, he muttered. Elise shrugged sympathetically. No, it's not. But Miss Reynolds wanted me to reassure you, keep at it. The article might be all bark and no bite if you show consistent improvements. That was easier said than done, Jack thought. Still, he forced himself to remain calm. Thanks, Elise, he said, setting the paper aside. Let's get to work. He spent the morning huddled with Brett, meticulously planning the newly expanded inspection schedules. Each vehicle would come in once every 10 days for a full check. Rotating through the fleet, they established a clear protocol for reporting suspicious findings, no more scattered notes. Meanwhile, Andrea took charge of logging every replaced part so they could track patterns in breakage. It was a flurry of collaboration that made Jack proud, if slightly overwhelmed. By afternoon, they'd hammered out a workable system. Jack felt a surge of hope. They were finally moving from reactive panic to proactive planning. But as he grabbed a quick lunch in the break room, just a stale sandwich he'd packed from home, his phone buzzed with an unknown number again. Feeling a pang of concern, he answered, "Jack Merritt here." A gravely male voice responded. "Merritt, this is Dwight Shelby, manager at the Oakhurst fueling station. You might recall we serviced some foundation vans." Jack nodded, though Dwight couldn't see him. "Yeah, I remember. Everything all right?" Dwight hesitated, then said, "We had a suspicious incident last night. Some fellow wearing a foundation jacket came by. Said he needed to check the tire pressure on a van that was parked here overnight, but he didn't show any ID. And when we asked for details, he got spooked and left." Jack felt his pulse spike. "You think he tampered with the van?" Dwight sighed. "We looked at it this morning. Found the lug nuts on one wheel partially loosened. Could have been an accident, but it sure feels deliberate." Jack clenched his jaw, a sinking feeling making his sandwich churn in his gut. "Thanks for letting me know. Dwight, don't let anyone near those vans unless they have proper ID from me or Ms. Reynolds. And if it's not too much trouble, could you check your security cameras?" Dwight chuckled grimly. "Already on it." Hanging up, Jack stared at his reflection in the break room's stainless steel fridge. Another sabotage attempt, and someone posing as foundation staff. This was bigger than random mischief. If these attempts continued, not only would they put lives at risk, but the board might decide the program was beyond saving, handing everything to Cal Barnes on a silver platter. Grim determination settled over Jack. The time for half measures was over. He needed a plan to catch whoever was behind this, and fast. That evening, Jack convened a late meeting in his office with Brett, Andrea, and Elise. He recounted Dwight Shelby's call, then laid out a plan to double down on security. "We'll need to issue official ID badges to every authorized staff member," he said, pointing to a typed list of existing employees. "No one touches a van or ambulance without scanning in. We'll upgrade locks on the garage doors, and any vehicle parked off-site must use a wheel lock or steering lock, so tampering becomes harder." Brett nodded, though skepticism lingered in his gaze. "IDs and locks help, but if the culprit is determined, they might find a workaround," Andrea chimed in. "Maybe we can place GPS trackers on each van that alert us if they're moved outside a scheduled route, and we could install dash cams that record whenever the vehicle is accessed." Elise made quick notes, occasionally checking with Jack. "We might need budget approvals for that many cameras and locks," she warned. Jack's shoulders slumped slightly. He knew finances were tight, especially with the sabotage fiasco raising doubt about the Foundation's approach. "I'll ask Clara. Maybe she can expedite it. We have to do something." Elise offered a small smile. "She trusts your judgment. Document your plan thoroughly. That'll help get the board's green light." After an hour of hammering out details, they dispersed to gather cost estimates and draft proposals. Jack lingered in his office, scanning a large city map pinned to the wall. The Foundation's routes sprawled across it like veins, connecting clinics, retirement homes, and remote towns. So many places where a saboteur could strike. He was about to pack up when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Careful who you trust inside. Not everyone is on your side." A chill snaked down his spine. He tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail. He sank into his chair, rereading the message. Inside, did that mean the saboteur worked within the Foundation staff? Or was it a red herring? He thought of the mechanics, administrators, drivers. Most seemed genuine, but it wouldn't take a large group to orchestrate sabotage. Even one determined individual, well placed, could wreak havoc. Deciding he wouldn't solve it tonight, he packed his notes, locked his office, and headed home. The drive felt like a vigil, scanning every passing truck or van suspiciously. The idea that someone on the inside might be feeding intel to Cal gnawed at him. He recalled Cal's hatred, how quickly the man fired him, how smug he'd been. Barnes might find an inside ally through bribery or shared resentment, or maybe it was someone with a personal grudge against Jack or the Foundation's changes. When he finally entered his apartment, Logan was asleep again, a math book splayed on the coffee table. Jack gently moved the book aside and sat next to the boy, noticing the lines of worry etched on Logan's brow even in slumber. Guilt welled up. He'd been so consumed by the sabotage crisis. He barely had energy for fatherhood. He pulled a blanket over Logan, reflecting on how Carrie would have scolded him to spend more time with their son. Tomorrow, he promised quietly, I'll make some time. Buddy, exhausted, he settled onto the couch, but sleep eluded him. He kept picturing a man in a stolen Foundation jacket, creeping through a fueling station at night. He saw twisted bolts, corroded lines, brakes failing on a lonely highway with a vulnerable patient. For the second time that week, he lay awake far past midnight, wrestling with ghosts he couldn't quite pin down. The next morning, Jack woke to the buzz of his phone's alarm, having grabbed only a few hours of fitful sleep. He rose, made coffee for Logan and himself, and insisted they share a quick breakfast. Dad's got a big day, Logan commented, noticing the tension in Jack's posture. Jack forced a smile. When do I not? He arrived at the Foundation early to find Clara in the main lobby, greeting some visiting donors. She waved him over. Jack, I'm leaving for a short trip to see a potential satellite clinic location. I'll be back in 2 days. Until then, you have free rein to implement the security measures. Just keep me updated. He briefed her quietly on the text message and the new sabotage theories, though he didn't have concrete proof of an inside job. Clara frowned. Let's not spread panic, but proceed with caution. By the time I return, I expect some progress on security. Also, she laid a hand on his arm gently. Take care of yourself. Don't burn out. We're playing a long game. Jack nodded, grateful for her unflagging trust, then hurried to oversee the day's tasks. He convened the mechanics again, announcing the new ID system. Some grumbled about the inconvenience, but no one openly objected. A wave of technicians from an outside firm arrived to install cameras in the main garage. By noon, half the place was a forest of wires and caution tape. Jack apologized for the temporary disruption. Better a short inconvenience now than a catastrophic failure later, he reasoned. In the midst of the chaos, Elise tracked him down with a memo from the finance department. They've approved a preliminary budget for locks and ID badges, she announced, handing him official forms. We can't do full GPS or dash cams for every vehicle just yet, but we can start with the most critical ambulances. Jack exhaled relief. At least they had some initial support. He was reviewing which ambulances got priority cameras when Brett approached, face grim. We just found an older ambulance that hasn't been used in weeks, stuffed away in the back lot. The coolant reservoir is empty. The radiator hoses were sliced. Looks deliberate. Jack's jaw clenched. All right, let's document it, fix it, and add that to the sabotage file. He glanced around the busy garage. We can't let up. We need to be on our guard until we catch them. The rest of the afternoon felt like a triage of sabotage prevention. Jack guided mechanics to double-check each vehicle's readiness. Andrea worked on standardizing a ready sheet each driver had to sign off on before taking a van out. Meanwhile, Elise updated him on the board's chatter, apparently. Trevor Dalton was pressing for a cost comparison with Barnes's proposals. Time was running short before the next review session, where the board might pivot if more sabotage incidents occurred. By evening, Jack found himself alone in the break room, nibbling on a stale energy bar. Every muscle ached. In the swirl of sabotage threats, board pressures, and personal exhaustion weighed on him like a lead vest. He considered calling Logan to say he'd be late, but it was nearly 8 p.m. He's probably finishing homework anyway, Jack muttered, trying to ease his guilt. He couldn't remember the last time they just relaxed together. As he was about to leave, his phone vibrated again, a text from that same unknown number. Stop digging, or risk burying yourself. Fury flared through Jack. He typed a quick response, "Who are you?" but got no reply. The direct threat rattled him, though this was no longer about subtle sabotage. It was personal intimidation. He pocketed the phone, half tempted to forward it to the police. But what proof did he have? His thoughts turned to Cal. This reeked of the man's brand of intimidation, or maybe an accomplice. You picked the wrong guy to intimidate, Jack growled under his breath, grabbing his coat. If there was one thing he'd learned in the Marines, it was never to back down under threat. He'd find the saboteur, even if that meant turning every bolt in the Foundation's garage upside down. His father's memory demanded no less, and so did the communities relying on those ambulances. 2 days passed in a blur of lock installations, ID badge creation, and endless vehicle inspections. Jack's direct approach to security began yielding small wins. A driver reported spotting a suspicious figure lurking near a parked van, but the locked gates and cameras scared them off. Another attempt to tamper with a wheel lock was foiled by the fact it required a specialized key. Each thwarted incident bolstered morale among the mechanics. During that time, Clara was away, and Jack resisted the urge to bombard her with anxious updates. Instead, he carefully cataloged every sabotage attempt, every fix, every sign of improvement. By the time Clara returned, he had a thick folder to present. He found her in her office, a tired smile on her lips. She looked paler than usual. Trip was productive, but I might have pushed myself too hard, she admitted. Easing into her chair, Jack quickly summed up the new locks and ID checks, concluding with, "We haven't had a major breakdown in 48 hours. A few suspicious attempts, but our measures held." Clara's face brightened. "That's excellent. The board meets in a week. You know, we'll need to show real results." She glanced over the folder's content, flipping pages. "This is thorough. Good job." Jack. Relief washed through him. Still, a question burned in his mind. "Ms. Reynolds, do you think Cal could have an ally on the inside? The sabotage almost feels like someone with direct knowledge of our routes." Clara pursed her lips. "It's possible. Cal knows how to exploit weaknesses. But without solid evidence, we can't accuse him. We can only keep forging ahead, building a stronger system." They were interrupted by a gentle knock, Elise stepping in. "Ms. Reynolds, sorry, but you have a phone call from a certain Trevor Dalton. He wants an update on the sabotage situation." Clara exchanged a glance with Jack. "I'll take it," she said, picking up her phone. Jack listened to her side of the conversation, mostly calm yes or no responses, a few patient explanations. After she hung up, she sighed. "Dalton's demanding a meeting with you, me, and possibly a representative from Barnes's group to weigh comparative proposals." Jack felt an electric jolt of apprehension. A face-to-face with Barnes. The man who'd fired him for doing the right thing. He forced a steady breath. When Clara massaged her temples, "Dalton wants it in 3 days. Says the board wants a final cost analysis. He also claims Barnes has a special discount plan that might be too good to ignore." Jack's jaw tightened. The sabotage must be part of Barnes's grand play, make the in-house plan appear chaotic, then swoop in with discount solutions. "All right," he said, straightening. "Let's gather every piece of positive data we have. I'll finalize the cost-benefit comparison. We'll show that a reliable, community-focused approach is cheaper in the long run, even if Barnes promises short-term savings." Clara nodded. "That's the spirit. But be ready. Barnes will come armed with spreadsheets and marketing pitches. He's done this before, in other towns. Leaving her office, Jack wrestled with a swirl of emotions: anger, determination, a hint of dread. Confronting Cal might reopen old wounds, yet it was a confrontation that seemed inevitable. He spent the rest of the day crunching numbers with Elise, comparing the average cost of outsourced repairs to the current in-house method. They factored in intangible benefits: faster response times, no delays in prioritizing patient vehicles. As he typed the final entries, he realized how tenuous it all was. A single sabotage-induced breakdown before the meeting could tip the scale in Barnes's favor. That night, he forced himself to leave earlier, determined to have dinner with Logan for once. They heated a pizza, and Jack quizzed the boy on school. "I'm thinking about joining the science club," Logan said hesitantly. "They do robotics, but there's a fee." Jack forced a cheerful grin. "We'll figure it out. Kid, I'm working on something big." They ate in companionable silence, the tension momentarily lifting. Jack let himself dream that, if he won the board over, he could give Logan more opportunities than he'd ever imagined. But as he tucked Logan into bed, a new wave of concern hit him. Cal was cunning, and the sabotage was relentless. With that meeting just 3 days away, every hour felt like a test. The only solace he found was that he wouldn't be alone. Brett and Andrea stood behind him. Clara championed him, and even some board members seemed open-minded. If they all pulled together, maybe they could shut Barnes out for good. Jack only hoped the next sabotage attempt wouldn't be the one to break them. The day of the showdown arrived faster than Jack expected. He spent the morning reviewing his final presentation with Elise, triple-checking the slides that compared costs, breakdown rates, and future projections. The data supported the in-house approach, but he knew that wouldn't stop Barnes from throwing curveballs. Clara's presence would help, but she had her own health to consider. Jack worried about how she'd handle a tense confrontation. They arrived at the Foundation's conference room, a spacious area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snowy city skyline. Board members trickled in. Dr. Rowe gave Jack a sympathetic nod. Sylvia Hughes offered a polite smile. Marvin Killian took his seat quietly. Trevor Dalton strolled in last, sipping coffee and scanning his phone. Cal Barnes was already seated at the far end of the table, wearing a crisp suit, hair slicked back. He exuded the same arrogant smirk that once made Jack's blood boil. As soon as Clara opened the meeting, Dalton asked for an update from Jack. Taking a breath, Jack stood and walked to the projector screen. He outlined the sabotage incidents, then highlighted how the new security measures had cut down successful attempts by nearly 80% over 2 weeks. He showed slides detailing cost avoidance, how catching issues early saved thousands in emergency repairs, finishing with a final slide that read, "Long-term community investment, lasting savings." He turned to the board. Heart pounding. "We're already seeing improvements in reliability, and with further time, the saboteur's impact will be nullified." Cal waited until the applause from Dr. Rowe and Sylvia died down. Then he rose, plastering a genial smile. "Impressive slideshow, but let me share a different perspective." He snapped his fingers, and an assistant dimmed the lights, revealing a sleek presentation. Barnes Auto Group has 12 fully modern service centers statewide, advanced diagnostic equipment, and integrated supply chains. We can maintain the Foundation's fleet at 20% less cost annually. Guaranteed. He clicked to a chart showing bright bars labeled Barnes Savings. Moreover, he continued, "We'll provide priority service, no waiting lines. Our round-the-clock operation ensures ambulances and vans get top billing." He shot Jack a sideways glance. "Why risk more sabotage when you can outsource to proven pros?" Jack clenched his jaw. He saw Dalton nodding at Cal's slides, the promise of a 20% cut apparently appealing. But Dr. Rowe piped up. "And what about emergency calls at 2 in the morning for a dialysis van in the mountains? Will your city-based centers handle that swiftly?" Cal's smile flickered. "We have tow trucks and remote partners. The vehicle might be delayed an hour or two, but that's standard. Meanwhile, our advanced tech reduces breakdowns to begin with." Jack couldn't stay silent. That hour or two can be life or death for some patients. he interjected. In-house means immediate dispatch of a service truck. We've proven that works. Cal spread his hands in a show of faux reasonableness. One or two heroic stories can't mask the sabotage fiasco. Ms. Reynolds, can you guarantee there won't be another breakdown that endangers a patient? He locked eyes with Clara. She drew a deep breath. No one can guarantee zero breakdowns, she said, voice firm. But I believe in empowering local communities, in building knowledge and capacity. Outsourcing everything to Barnes might be cheaper on paper, but it ignores the intangible benefits of trust, speed, and community synergy. Cal's smile turned predatory. Trust is a funny thing. Ask the patients on that highway, or the board members who read the newspaper about sabotage. I respect the Foundation's mission, but if they truly want the best service, they'd choose Barnes. Dalton leaned forward, arms crossed. Miss Reynolds, we'll vote next week at the formal session. But I must say, Barnes's numbers are compelling. If sabotage continues, the risk might be too high. A ripple of unease spread. Clara gripped the table edge, color draining from her face. Jack saw the tension in her eyes, fear that this might unravel everything. Cal, meanwhile, looked triumphant. With the meeting adjourned, board members milled about. Some offered Jack polite encouragement. Others seemed tempted by Barnes's glossy pitch. Jack confronted Cal at the door. How low do you have to stoop to sabotage vehicles and then claim you're the solution, he muttered, keeping his voice low enough not to cause a scene. Cal feigned surprise. Sabotage. Now that's a serious accusation, he said lightly. Maybe the Foundation's just incompetent. Good luck. Merit? With that, he sauntered away, leaving Jack simmering. If the board voted in Barnes's favor, everything they'd built would be scrapped. As Clara left the room, breathing shakily, Jack decided that one final push was needed, one last piece of proof or success story that would override Cal's cheap labor promises. Jack retreated to the garage, mind spinning. The board would vote in just a few days. Clara's health was obviously fragile, and he hated seeing her under so much stress. Brett and Andrea approached, both wearing tense expressions. We heard about the meeting. Andrea said, word is, Barnes made a strong case. Jack rubbed his temples. Strong on paper, but we can still sway them. We just need something undeniable like a major crisis we handle flawlessly, or hard evidence tying sabotage to Barnes. Otherwise, the board might cave. Brett nodded. So let's escalate our plan, catch the saboteur red-handed. They decided to conduct a kind of sting operation, staking out the facility after hours. The garage was locked and covered by newly installed cameras, but the saboteur might try to target vans left at medical outposts or fueling stations. So Jack contacted a handful of remote sites, setting up small sensor devices on the vans. If anyone opens the hood or tamps with a door, it'll send an alert to my phone, he explained to Brett. We'll keep watchers at 2 likely sabotage spots. If the saboteur appears, we pounce. A hush fell over the garage as they hammered out details. Night came quickly in winter, so by 6 p.m., it was already dark. Jack stationed Andrea at the Oakhurst fueling station with a driver volunteer, while Brett covered the smaller clinic in Pine Creek. Jack himself sat in his truck near a rest stop on the outskirts of Findlay, phone at the ready, scanning for suspicious movement. The air was bitterly cold, a numbness creeping into his fingers despite gloves. Hours crawled by. He sipped stale coffee from a thermos, memories of his Marine days creeping up on him. All those nights waiting in hostile territory for a sign of movement, listening to the wind rustle through the desert or the forest. Now it was the hush of a Wyoming winter night, broken only by the distant hum of passing cars on the main highway. He thought of Logan, alone at home, likely worried, but trusting his father to do what needed doing. Then, shortly after 10 p.m., his phone vibrated. Sensor alert, Pine Creek Clinic, van number 23. Jack's adrenaline surged. He texted Brett alert at van number 23. Are you seeing anything? A moment later, Brett responded, yes, suspicious figure near the van. Heading out now. Jack started his truck, heart pounding. Pine Creek was a 20-minute drive away. If they could catch the culprit, they might finally prove who was behind all this. As he sped through dark roads, the phone chimed again, this time a direct call from Brett. I see someone messing with the engine. I'm approaching. Jack gripped the steering wheel, heart thrumming. Wait for me if you can, but don't let them flee. The line crackled with Brett's breathing. Copy that. The next few minutes felt endless. Jack pictured a confrontation. If the saboteur was armed, things could get ugly. The truck's headlights cut through swirling snow, the sky moonless. When he finally arrived at the Pine Creek Clinic parking lot, he saw Brett's SUV parked with hazard lights on. The clinic was dark except for a single porch light, hard in his throat. Jack leaped out, scanning for movement. Then he spotted Brett standing near an open van hood, flashlight on the engine. Where'd they go? Jack hissed. Running over. Brett pointed to footprints in the snow leading toward the back of the clinic building. They ran when I confronted them. Couldn't see their face, they wore a hooded jacket. But I'm pretty sure it was a man. He dropped something. Though, from under his coat, Brett produced a small plastic ID card that read Barnes Auto Group in bold letters. The name field was blank, but the company logo was unmistakable. Jack's pulse pounded. This was something tangible. That's enough to suspect a direct link, he breathed. Let's follow those footprints. They moved cautiously, following the trail around the building's side, only to find it vanished where the intruder likely hopped a fence. The whir of a distant engine suggested the saboteur had a getaway car. Still, they had the ID card, a direct link to Barnes's outfit. Jack steadied his breathing, feeling a surge of vindication. If they could present this to the board, it might blow Barnes's sabotage scheme wide open. Maybe now they'd have the ammunition to end this nightmare. He patted Brett's shoulder. You did good. Let's secure the van and document the tampering thoroughly. As they locked the hood and photographed the footprint trail, Jack couldn't help a wry smile. Cal Barnes might have thought himself untouchable, but he'd left traces behind. And come the vote, the board would finally see who was truly incompetent and criminal. Dawn light seeped across Finley as Jack and Brett returned to the foundation with triumphant exhaustion. Andrea and the others converged in the garage to hear the news. We almost caught the saboteur, Brett said, voice still buzzing with adrenaline. But we got this. He held up the Barnes Auto Group ID card, carefully sealed in a plastic evidence bag. A chorus of relieved exclamations erupted. Jack pushed aside a wave of fatigue. We'll show this to Ms. Reynolds and the board. Let them see that the sabotage is directly linked to Barnes, Andrea asked. Shouldn't we call the police too? Jack hesitated, exchanging a glance with Brett. Yes, but let's talk to Clara first. This has major implications for the board vote. We also want a complete chain of evidence. They filed a quick incident report, snapping pictures of the card, footprints, and the van's sabotaged engine. Then, physically drained. Jack sank into a chair in his office. Elise found him there, eyes half closed. Jack, she said gently, you should go home and rest. We'll schedule a meeting with Clara and the board tomorrow. Just email me everything you have. He nodded, sending the relevant files to her. Thank you. Elise, this might be the turning point. She smiled softly. You look like you've been up all night. Jack gave a weary laugh. Because I have. With that, he grabbed his coat and drove back to the apartment, body buzzing from too much caffeine and adrenaline. It was mid-morning by the time he arrived, and Logan was already off to school. The apartment was quiet, giving him space to collapse on the couch and drift into a deep, dreamless sleep. Hours later, he woke to find mid-afternoon sun stretching golden rays across the living room floor. Feeling somewhat refreshed, he checked his phone. A message from Clara: need to see you ASAP. Bring the ID card evidence. He quickly changed into fresh clothes and hurried to the foundation. Clara was in her office with a small group: Dr. Rowe, Marvin Killian, and Elise. They all turned as Jack entered, the ID card bag in hand. Dr. Rowe looked incredulous. Barnes's ID. He's behind the sabotage. Jack explained the stakeout, the footprints, how Brett confronted a figure who dropped the card. Dr. Rowe whistled softly. That's explosive. Marvin Killian scratched his chin. We'll have to confirm it's not planted, but it's damning. The board can't ignore this, Elise piped up. This is enough to call for an internal investigation, maybe a criminal one. We can have the local authorities examine the card for prints. Clara massaged her temples, strain etched on her features. Yes, do that immediately. Jack will present this at the board meeting tomorrow. If we prove sabotage, Barnes's entire proposal is moot, possibly criminal. A sense of relief and urgency coursed through Jack. They were so close to vindication. Yet he worried Cal might find a way to spin it. He'll likely claim it's a frame-up, Jack muttered. Dr. Rowe nodded. We just need to show consistent sabotage attempts, culminating in last night's incident. We have logs, camera footage, and now this ID. It's enough for a strong case. Clara took the evidence bag from Jack with a delicate hand, her eyes shining with gratitude. You did it, Jack. You stood firm despite everything. He shrugged, swallowing a lump of emotion. Couldn't have done it alone. Everyone pitched in. We had to protect what this foundation stands for. Dr. Rowe gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder. Well, you've certainly done that. As they left the office, Marvin Killian said he'd schedule an urgent session with the local police to share the evidence. Elise prepared an email to the full board, urging them to attend the session tomorrow. Jack, exhausted but elated, managed a half smile at Clara. Finally, some justice, he murmured. She closed her eyes, nodding. Yes, let's hope so. And let's pray it ends without further drama. We've all had enough. Jack couldn't agree more. The sabotage game was coming to a head, and if all went well, the Foundation's future and the integrity of their mission would be secure. The following morning, the Foundation's board gathered in the same conference room that once witnessed Barnes's glossy presentation. This time, the mood was decidedly different. Clara sat at the head of the table, looking poised yet pale, as though the tension weighed heavily on her. Jack stood near a side table with Elise, Dr. Rowe, Brett, and Andrea, all key witnesses to the sabotage saga. Trevor Dalton arrived, glancing around with wary curiosity. Marvin Killian escorted 2 uniformed police officers, who set up a small projector to display images from the sabotage scenes. The last to enter was Cal Barnes, wearing a conservative suit and forced confidence. He offered a polite nod to the board, though his eyes flicked with unease. Clara began with a calm, measured tone. We've convened this special session to address a grave matter, the repeated sabotage of Foundation vehicles. Evidence suggests a link to Barnes Auto Group. Mr. Merritt and his team will explain. She gestured to Jack, who stepped forward, heart pounding but steadied by determination. Jack showed slides photos of tampered brake lines, sliced hoses, the loosened alternator bracket, and the late-night stakeout results. Brett and Andrea testified how they found each sabotage site. The police officer then displayed an enlarged photo of the ID card discovered at Pine Creek Clinic. Preliminary forensics confirmed the card is genuine Barnes Auto Group material. Not a forgery, the officer stated, though the name field was left blank. We'll continue analyzing it for prints. A hush fell over the room. Cal's face hardened, hands gripping the table's edge. Dalton seemed stunned, eyes darting between Cal and the evidence. Clara spoke softly. Mr. Barnes, care to explain how your company's ID card ended up at a sabotage scene? Cal's nostrils flared. I have no knowledge of that. It could be stolen from my office. Someone must be framing me. The Barnes Group has zero reason to sabotage vehicles. Jack stepped in, voice firm. You do have a reason. You stand to win a multi-million-dollar contract if the Foundation's in-house fleet fails? Cal sneered. That's quite an accusation. Merritt, where's your proof I orchestrated this? The police officer cleared his throat. We're pursuing leads. If you're innocent, you'll want to cooperate. But these repeated incidents point to a systematic effort to undermine the fleet. Dr. Rowe asked the board for calm. Let's consider the big picture. Sabotage attempts soared after Mr. Merritt introduced improvements. Barnes's proposal came with suspicious timing, capitalizing on those failures. A worried expression flitted across Dalton's face. He cleared his throat. If any sabotage is proven in court, we obviously can't partner with Barnes's group. The board would be forced to reject that bid. In that moment, Cal's composure cracked. This is a witch hunt. Ms. Reynolds was always biased. She hired a reckless mechanic who Clara cut him off. Mr. Barnes, please refrain from personal attacks. We have logs, camera footage, and an ID card. Unless you have alternative evidence, the board will make its decision. Dalton turned to the board. Given these revelations, I move that we suspend any further discussions with Barnes Auto Group pending a criminal investigation. We can finalize a renewed commitment to the in-house fleet under Mr. Merritt's plan. A murmur of agreement spread among the board members. Even Marvin Killian, who had been on the fence, nodded. The motion carried unanimously. Cal, sputtering with anger, stood up. You'll regret this, he hissed. My lawyers will. Clara lifted a weary hand. We'll welcome any legal review. But for now, you're dismissed. The police stepped closer, suggesting an escort if needed. Eyes blazing, Cal stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled. A tense silence followed. Then Dr. Rowe exhaled a breath, smiling at Jack. Congratulations. It seems the Foundation's in-house program is safe. Clara mustered a faint grin. And justice, hopefully, will be served. Applause broke out among some staffers in the back. Jack let out the breath he'd been holding for what felt like months. He locked eyes with Brett, Andrea, and Elise, exhausted smiles of victory passing between them. Clara turned to Jack. You've earned a better title than just Director of Fleet Maintenance. You've effectively safeguarded our entire operation. Tears glistened in her eyes. Thank you. For me, for the patients, for every rural community that relies on these vehicles. Jack's throat tightened. He thought of Logan, the lonely nights, the fear of failing. I thank you for believing in me, he managed, voice shaking. On that snowy morning, with the board's faith reaffirmed and sabotage unmasked, Jack felt a profound sense of closure. He'd saved more than a few ambulances, he'd preserved a mission that served thousands. As the meeting adjourned, he found himself exchanging warm handshakes with board members. Outside the windows, snow glistened, and the city below looked new, brimming with possibilities. He stepped into the hallway, phone in hand, eager to call Logan and share the news. His father's old motto echoed in his mind. Fix what needs fixing, no matter the cost. In the end, that choice led him to a place of purpose, unity, and hope. And in that moment, he realized he had not only repaired engines, he'd repaired a community's faith in doing the right thing. A future of promise stretched before him, wide as the Wyoming sky. When the dust finally settled, it was clear some things broken can never truly be made whole again. The scars remain etched into hands, carved deep into memories, whispered into silences shared by those left behind. The victories came at a cost. Each triumph paid in sacrifices that weighed heavy on every heart. Through all the fire and smoke, through betrayals and courage alike, one truth emerged quietly. Undeniable and solemn, the hardest battles aren't fought in the open, but within the quiet chambers of conscience, where courage means more than strength, and justice more than mere vengeance. In the end, we understand not all heroes wear uniforms or carry badges. Some heroes are simply those who chose kindness in a moment of chaos, who dared to fix what others sought to destroy. And now, as life returns to what passes for normal, we're left with one lingering question, a question echoing gently, unanswered in the spaces between who we are and who we wish to become. When your own crossroads arrives, when fate demands a choice between comfort and courage, what kind of hero will you choose to be?